Josh's pronouns are he, him. He's calling him from Texas, who wants to share. This is interesting. He's listed as a theist here, but it says he wants to share a story of spiritual deconstruction and rejecting hell and accepting evolution and stuff. So I'm interested to see what Josh is talking about. Josh, you are on AXP. How are you today?
Hi, guys. I am so nervous right now. This is my first time calling in. I'm talking to billions of people on the internet. It's a little nerve-wracking.
It's all right. I do it every day, and I'm terrible. So, like, if I can get away with it, you can too.
Yeah, I'm scared too, Josh. Don't worry.
I absolutely love the both of you. I love your YouTube channels. You've been very helpful to me. Emma, you are hilarious and thoughtful. I wanted to thank you for making me aware of the Alex Jones video game. Absolutely hilarious.
That's a thing?
Yeah, that's a thing.
Awesome. Forrest, for help. Forrest, you're a really smart dude, and you've helped me understand evolution, so thank you.
I'm glad I helped you understand evolution. I disagree that I'm a smart dude, but I appreciate that you like my videos.
Yeah, Noah's flood, when you think of a global flood, it doesn't make much sense, so that was very helpful.
I love making that video.
First off, I want to talk about how I came to accept evolution. I started off as a young Earth creationist. Pretty early on in life, I did some research at the age of the Earth. My interpretation of the Bible was telling me one thing, and science was telling me another. That's when I discovered godandScience.org. The site is defunct now, but it was a very helpful resource for me. It gave me the scientific evidence for an old Earth and reasons why it is supported by Genesis. The one piece of evidence that was overwhelming was distant starlight. That pretty much proves an old universe. So I became an old Earth creationist.
Okay.
Evolution still made no sense. I couldn't reconcile that with Genesis. And the website author didn't believe in evolution either. But I will say one of the dominoes that started to fall was the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate. And was when Ken Ham said, "Nothing can change my mind." One of the things that Christianity teaches is humility, and I was able to recognize that is not humility, that is arrogance. This was highly disturbing. I realized I did not want to be like this guy, to have a closed mind. And I would hear things about evolution and be like, "Oh, that kind of makes sense," but I just don't think it's true. The thing that got me thinking about why I was rejecting it, all these scientists and all these fields are coming to the conclusion that evolution happened. How could all these people be wrong? Are they lying? They spent their lives studying the subject. Am I smarter than all of them? So I was able to defer to the scientists about so many things, and including the age of the Earth, and why should evolution be any different? I think the thing that finally tipped me over the edge was the DNA evidence. All life is genetically related. The second chromosome in humans is the fused chromosome to 8 chromosomes. And I guess the final nail in the coffin was retroviruses. Retroviruses embed themselves in DNA. They become more closely related. The more closely related you are to another species, the more retroviruses you share in common with that species. This was stone cold proof that special creation, all animals and humans are separate creations, was just not true. And so I finally just embraced reality, and and now I would say that Genesis 1 and 2 they have to be poetic. They can't be literal.
So this all sounds fantastic. I'm really happy to hear your story and to hear these things. This is what happens a lot. A lot of stories that we hear from people who have deconstructed are, I was looking for reasons to believe in a God, and it turns out I couldn't find any. Or I was looking for evidence against evolution, and it turns out I found a lot of evidence for it. Or I was looking for evidence for a young Earth, and all I could find was old Earth evidence. And like things like this happen a lot. But it says here on the call screen that you're still a theist. So like, I don't think that it's necessary. It doesn't make any sense to say, well, here's all this science, therefore there is no God. But I'm curious to know where you are in your journey now, to where you've been able to tear down all of these beliefs. And it sounds like you're still stuck with, okay, yeah, I understand this is the age of the earth. This is how planets form. This is how life starts. This is how life evolves. Here's all these things. But also there's a God on top of it. And so like, could you explain where you're at with that with me?
Yeah, sure. I've watched too many of Atheist Experience clips and you, Forrest, to know that, to try to prove that the Bible is true, that God exists. Like every argument I ever heard for my position, I've heard a better argument against it. So like,
okay.
I don't know. I think I'm just kind of holding this hope of like there is a God, and that there's a good life after this life. It's just something fundamental that I've had all my life. So I'm sure you would both agree if I continue down this path, I may become more either agnostic or atheist, but that's just not where I am right now.
Okay. So like, that's better than nothing, but I gotta ask, like, when you say like what you just said is every single argument I have for God, I have heard a better argument for not believing. How then you answered the question when you said, I still have some sort of hope. I guess my issue is, for me, I don't have that hope. I hope that there isn't such a thing, because such a thing sounds awful to me. And you said you've heard me talk about this, so I won't bore you with it. But like, where does that hope get you? Why do you have it? Why is it important to you? What is it doing for you? Is it something that you're willing to part with? Is it something that you would part with? Can you explain when you would, and like what would get that away from you? I'm not trying to say this is the show we're here to dash your hopes, but like, I think life is a lot better without that one particular one. I think that hope is a prison, and it's not really it's a bastardization of how wonderful the word hope usually is. So, would you be amicable to exploring that a little bit further with Emma and I?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, yeah, I mean, I have a huge community around me of Christians that I love and respect. And I have one good Christian friend who's much more progressive and would agree with a lot of things I just said. And I had plans about talking about my deconstruction on hell, and I think he agrees with that as well. It's I think the community, in a sense, has helped me. And I was going to mention this in my second part, but I've had some tragic things in my life that has gotten me through it, and I just don't see how, if I were an atheist or agnostic, how I would have that same hope.
Yeah, that's very common. You have been robbed of the opportunity to develop healthy coping mechanisms because religion tried to fill a void that it shouldn't have been allowed to fill. That, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And that's one of the damnable miseries of deconstruction, is that now you have to go back and learn how to deal with having a shitty day in a new way, how to lose a family member and not lose your mind along with it, how to handle trauma and pain and suffering and misery and the drudgery of day-to-day life without some thought that everything is going to be okay as soon as you die. I think that would be where I'm happy to talk about some of my ideas with you if you'd like, but like, it sounds to me like that's where you need to be focusing your attention, is like, okay, now how do I live without God? How do I get by without religion? And if this God's real and the faith is a cool thing, fine. It can sit there in the background while I live my life. But at the very least, taking the time to develop the skills to deal with life on your own and building the strength up to just exist in this world by yourself, I think that's a noble and worthy endeavor for anybody, regardless of whether or not a God is real. Do you agree with that? Or do you think that you need to maintain this crutch for as long as you live?
I mean, the crutch is certainly helping.
As crutches do. But it'd be a lot better to be able to get by on your own, yeah?
Maybe. Do I have time to go into my second part, or do you need to move on?
I want to see if Emma has anything to say before we do.
Oh, I'd just say this isn't the place for me or Forrest to say abandon your community, join our side, we have cookies. I completely understand where you're coming from. If you continue to explore, I think that this isn't, nobody is saying abandon all your beliefs overnight. I do think, especially once you start getting interested in science and how that works with and sometimes against the Bible, the historicity of the Bible is something that I really love digging into. I think it's really fascinating. That process can lead you towards a more secular path, but thanks to things like AXP and the ACA and stuff like that, you can build yourself a community outside of that, and having an expanded support network that isn't just within your religious community is a good thing anyway. So my advice would just be also expand those horizons. You don't have to do that with the view to abandoning your community. It's just a benefit anyway. That would be how I would sort of move on from there. Because it sounds like you've got a very open mind. You're interested in learning. I would just keep the momentum up, because that's great. If you carry on doing that as a Christian, that's brilliant too. Just keep going.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, I'll move on to the hell part. I supposedly got saved at 5. I prayed the prayer. Grew up with the traditional view of most people go to hell, some people go to heaven. Hell is a very real place. I didn't know at the time, but the term was eternal conscious torment. Didn't care. Pastor who's talking about Matthew 7, not everyone who says Lord, Lord into the kingdom of heaven. And I was terrified because my prayer I prayed when I was 5 was no longer valid. And then about 4 years later, we had a family tragedy. My brother committed suicide. We had the funeral, and it was made very clear that he prayed the salvation prayer. But so he's in heaven, right? But I couldn't stop thinking about Matthew 7, and what if his prayer was not genuine? And I discovered Bill Weiss, the guy who wrote 23 Minutes in Hell. Hell, it's the worst possible thing to imagine. Literal fire, demons ripping you to shreds, no oxygen to breathe, no food or water forever. And me not thinking much, this was kind of proof for me that ECT was real, eternal conscious torment. And I was like, if my brother is experiencing this now, never-ending pain and suffering, nothing I can do about it. No matter how hard I pray, you'll never experience relief. This was pretty torturous for me. Completely ate away at me. If there ever was a chance to save him, it was far too late now. And then I started questioning some of his theological things. He said a really small theological thing that was different than what I believed, having to do with sickness and where it comes from. And I started asking more questions, and I'm is this guy really telling the truth? And one of those new questions was, how can a Christian be happy in heaven knowing a lot of their friends, family, and loved ones are suffering forever? Why wouldn't all-loving God torture people endlessly? Why are you completely savable before death, but the second you die, God stops loving you? And I just came to the conclusion that an all-loving God and eternal separation or eternal conscious torment is just incompatible. If he desires all to be saved, I honestly, I think when it comes down to it, hell is a manipulation tactic to keep people from leaving the faith, keep them in those seats on Sunday, keep the tithe money coming in. And I've heard tragic stories of atheists who don't believe in God, heaven, hell, yet they still have nightmares and haunting thoughts over the hell concept. And I've had that exact same experience. And I think mainstream Christianity is doing so much damage to people with this idea of hell. And I hope we as Christians could rethink this doctrine. And I think actually
sorry, Josh, you finish up.
Because I was the Christians out there and be like, maybe kind of try to think about this for yourself, and so instead of just pointing to Bible verses and being like, that's it, does hell really is a loving God and the nature of hell is that really compatible?
So I find that really interesting, Josh, because that's one of the fundamental problems I have with Christianity. One of the absolute stumbling blocks, walls between myself and Christianity has always been how can anyone be comfortable with the concept of heaven and hell. I would never, ever, if I had the option, if it was real and I got to the gates of heaven, I would say no thank you, because good people, or, you know, people of whatever, I guess at that point we have to define goodness, whatever, there are people suffering eternally. I am not comfortable with eternal peace, joy, whatever, while that exists. I'm interested that you have found that a moral stumbling block and come to the conclusion that an all-loving God, which I completely agree with, couldn't do those things, but there's a biblical precedent for that. So my question is kind of, and it's, I guess it ties into your reading of Genesis as well. How are you understanding some of the Bible as the manipulative church, manipulative priests, some of the Bible as poetic? How are you defining what is your sort of real faith, as it were?
Like, how do I reconcile my universalist beliefs with hellfire in the Bible?
Yeah, what when you pick up the Bible, how do you know what is real and what is not? Because the concept of hell is a biblical concept based on what is in the canon.
The longer I live, the more I come to realize there's. You take any number of Christians who look at a Bible verse, and you'll come up with a million different answers as to what it means. And I've heard things of eternal as being mistranslated. It doesn't mean forever. It means for an age. I've heard fire is not like a torturous fire. It's like a fire of refinement, like you know, make gold pure, that kind of thing.
Stick your hand in a forge and tell me that's not torturous fire. Like, what's the difference?
I find it a little bit of a stretch and still not okay. If it was actually an age, if the fire isn't that bad, it's still not okay for me. And my question is still the same. How do you decide that translation is the correct one? And then are you planning to go through the whole Bible that way? Because that's sort of what I would recommend for the position you're in, is to go through the Bible and say, okay, what is... If some of this is metaphorical, if some of this cannot be morally acceptable, what in this text is real? And I wonder if it's worth exploring, not what you just find objectionable morally that you remember from the Bible, but going through the whole of your faith, because you've sort of acknowledged that some of your faith beliefs are contradictory with what you hold morally and logically.
Yeah, like I said, I may be transitioning to another point, maybe closer to agnosticism or atheism, but I don't see that now, but I'm certainly not going to count it out. And like I said, with one of my friends I mentioned earlier, he has the view that it's possible that Moses wasn't even a real person. So, I mean, there's lots of Christians out there with so much purpose. And for a lot of Christians, it's the Bible is, they have to accept it, or at least their interpretation of it has to be right. And so, well, the Bible says like a fire, so I guess that's reality.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's that or Catholic dogma, or, you know, the Quran. So it's you kind of, based on how the religion works, you kind of have to take the whole, or you do a deep dive into the historicity of every book, which I think is the most interesting way of doing it, but I'm not your boss.
A lot of Christians I talk to, they're like, you know, God is bigger than all of our systems. And if that's true, then it's very likely that God can be found through other ways than just showing up at a Southern Baptist church and accepting their interpretation of the Bible.
I mean, sure, but like, what a jerk to play hide and seek for so long, so thoroughly. Like, that's, I don't know, man. Why did
he make the text changeable? Why did he put such a fallible way of understanding him and what he wants us to do down on the earth?
If he could do anything, he could go back to frickin' Bronze Age Palestine and invent an iPad and record a little YouTube video for us. And, you know, I'm just saying, like, it's, to me, it sounds like you're on your way. It sounds like you're on a journey now of progressive deconstruction and picking apart these beliefs. And it sounds like there's still some things you're holding on to, probably partially because of fear, because of what you already said, the comfort and the hope of it. But the more that you answer Emma's questions, the more, I think, to me at least, hopefully to you as well, it's becoming more and more clear that, like, really there is no utility to what you're saying. There's nothing that you're saying is like, okay, I can use this framework, I can use this model, and I can find out what's true. It's just, this doesn't feel good, but this does. So I'm going to rip these pages out of the book and say the book is perfect again. And like that, to me, is something that I hope. And this may sound incredibly condescending, and I really don't mean it to, so forgive me if it does. It sounds to me like something that you're going to look back on in 6 months and be like, fuck. Okay. Yeah, no, I you know what I mean? Like you'll be able to kind of from all the progress you've said you've made so far of like, I'm definitely believe in young earth. And then you listen to a reasonable debate about it and you're like, okay, well, I guess that doesn't work. And I definitely don't believe in evolution. And then you read up on it and you're like, okay, well, I guess that makes sense. And then you hell hits you and you're like, all right, but like actually my morality doesn't allow me to accept that or to think that's okay. So therefore I'm going to change my belief system again. It sounds to me like you're on the way at this point where in a few months' time, you'll be able to say, all right, this whole thing, when I apply the same rules of logic and morality to this belief system as I do to literally anything else ever, it falls apart. And therefore, I'm not going to waste my life trying to hold up a sandcastle. I'm just going to let it crumble. And I'm going to go do something more meaningful with my time, with my brain power, with my heart. I'm going to go do something that makes me happy. And I'm going to go make the world a little bit better. And I'm going to make sure everybody's, like the first caller said, you know, like if I know I'm going to die anyway, I'm going to be as little of a dick as possible. And I'm going to try to make as many people smile as I can before I go. And that to me sounds like a much better way to live than trapped by the shackles of the fear of the potential maybe monster in the sky that you've already reasoned your way halfway out of. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we were to continue this conversation, and I think you already have, you can definitely run circles around me because I've listened to too much AXP and Forrest Valkai to know that that you're not going to argue the Bible and God's existence. So.
No, not in a fun way. But anyway, that's the Josh. That's about 20 minutes, and we got to move on to the next call. But I really appreciate you sharing your story with us, and I really,
nice to hear.
I have the utmost hope for you because you sound like a really smart guy, and you sound like a guy who's able to like parse some things apart and see what you believe and why, and not just I believe it, so I believe it, so I believe it. And I encourage you to call back next time either Em or I are on, give us an update, you know, and let us know how you're doing. Keep in touch, and hopefully someday you call in, it won't have a T next to your name, it'll have an A next to your name, and we can all celebrate. Come to the dark side.
Honor and privilege. I really appreciate you. I love you guys. Thank you so much for letting me get my little story there.
My pleasure, man.
You,
Thanks so much for calling in.